Rugby with Huw Griffin.
My friend Huw Griffin is here again. We're going to be talking about this weekend semi-finals for the European Cup competitions, and we all know South Africans are not really that interested. So before we talk about those semi-finals specifically, we read just an article just today that said the boss of the EPCR, Jacques Renaud, reckons the format is brilliant. It's not as good as it could be, but it's very, very good apparently to what he's hearing. Number one, welcome back, you, and number two, do you agree with that?
Hello, yes, you sent me this article to have a look at, and it says, and I quote, "It's not perfect, but the feedback we're getting is it's very good." I'm not sure who he's getting that feedback from. It's certainly none of the fans who are watching it. I can only assume that it's the clubs who are looking to like grind their own axe, whether that's maximizing the number of match days they have at home or minimizing the distraction that the European Cup is, whatever it is. I can only assume that the feedback is coming from the top clubs who bends the EPCR to their will, because the fans, certainly nobody likes this format.
Of course, we're a South African channel, so obviously we look at this from a South African point of view. Why would any of these overseas teams make it easier for South Africa to compete and be more competitive? We know we're struggling. South African teams are struggling with all the travel and squad depths and budget caps and everything else. We've talked about this before. Of course, they're not going to say, "Oh, we want to change it," and by extension, then benefiting the South African teams, wouldn't they?
Yeah, well, from if you're the problem is that EPCR was created as at the behest of the French and the English. So there was something that preceded EPCR, an organization, and the French and the English walked away from that because they deemed it unfair that they weren't getting enough money from it, basically. It was all about the TV rights. And now, obviously, you guys from South Africa in via the URC, and the French and the English don't like that. They will openly talk about how, how can you have a European Cup with clubs from Africa in it? They're just openly against it. Even Anton Dupont has said he doesn't understand why the South Africans are in it. And you and I have had the conversation about whether it's a good thing that the South Africans are in it or not. So people can check out that previous episode, I guess, if they like. So, but to your question, why would the French and the English change it to benefit the South Africans, especially when the most obvious change to make is to reduce the number of teams in it, probably reduce the number of French teams, and definitely reduce the number of English teams. Again, the turkeys aren't going to vote for Christmas, are they?
Mm.
So, yeah, and just some of the many reasons why it just doesn't work anymore.
Just explain to us briefly, seeing you're from England yourself and you've been around a while with these games, you understand how these competitions actually work. Just tell us briefly how they really work. I mean, how do the teams that play in it get selected, or how do they get elected, if that's the right word? And then how does it work in terms of home and away and the rounds and everything else? Just guide us through it briefly, because I tell you what, we're struggling to understand it over here, and we sort of always sort of kind of surprised when Northampton Saints pitched up at Loftus and then beat us. We don't understand this competition, and we're the first to admit it.
Yeah, that was a big shock. That was probably the shock result of the pool stages was the Saints rocking up to Loftus and winning. So if we go back in time, the format used to be like a World Cup format where I think it was six pools of four. So and it went straight to a quarterfinals, and everybody liked that. Now there was a lot more games because you played everyone in your pool home and away. So there was a lot more games. And looking back on it, you wonder how did we ever make that work? And that's, back in the day, one of the big criticisms of club rugby was when fixtures would clash with international rugby, and everybody hated that. And what we have now is that the club game and the international games mostly don't clash, but it means that you've got big gaps in the club season, which people don't like either. So currently now it's the top eight from all of the big leagues, top 14 URC and English Premiership, and they go in to a two seeded pool. So rather than it being like a World Cup multiple pool style competition, it's just two conferences almost, a bit like how the top 14 was when that first started. Not top, sorry, not top 14, Pro 14. And then it's seeded based on that in terms of how you decide who you get home and who you get away. That's shrouded in mystery. All I can say is that French teams very rarely go away to Wales. We're in the third season of it so far, and we're yet to see a top French team travel to Wales in the Champions Cup. So there's that. Yeah, it's shrouded in mystery, which makes it means it's open for people to get suspicious and people to make conspiracy theories. But essentially, yeah, theoretically the eight best teams from each league get in, which is hugely problematic for the English because they've only got 10 teams, which means the level of badness that you have to be to not get into it is ridiculous. Like it's easier to get into the Champions Cup for the English than it was a couple of years ago in the old Super Rugby format where 8 out of 12 got into the playoffs. Like it's easier than that even, and everybody hated that.
Yeah. Well, we saw Exeter Chiefs firing the coaching staff just the other day because they got the biggest hiding, I don't know how many years or ever for that matter. And they're barely not in the Champions Cup. They're not, are they?
They're one position below. There's a big gap now, but that's how bad that they had to be. So that's
Mm,
Exeter Chiefs suspended their coaches after they lost 79-17 or 79-12 or
mm,
something away to Gloucester. Honestly, like I don't know if you saw any of that game. I watched the second half. I think Greekers or Borders or Eastern Province Elephants would think that they'd give Gloucester a better game than Exeter gave them. It was shocking. It wasn't professional rugby.
yeah. Well, that's now the Champions Cup. Now, below that is the Challenge Cup. And when you fall out from the Champions Cup and you're in a fifth position of each of those four pools, you're allowed to progress to the Challenge Cup. Now, this is sort of an inferior cup. What's the whole reason for existence? Or why does this cup even exist? Is it really worth the while?
Well, if you take the football comparison where teams get into Europe, that doesn't that not every team gets into Europe in football. You have teams who just don't play. Now the difference with football is that the European fixtures are played midweek. So all of the teams have domestic games at the weekend. So yes, financially it hurts them, but it's not so much to be a problem. Whereas at club level in the URC, for example, clubs only have 9 home games per season. So one every 1 1/3 months. So that's not really enough to survive. So everybody needs to have extra fixtures. So the Challenge Cup basically just
Mm,
it gives these other clubs who aren't the top clubs something to be getting on with in the meantime. And yeah, there's loads of clubs who aren't that fussed about being in it. That's why a lot of the French teams aren't fussed about it because they've got plenty of fixtures at home. They don't need the extra fixtures. Whereas the URC teams and now the English Premiership teams only having 10 clubs needs to make up the fixtures, and it just keeps people interested. It keeps the money rolling in. There's been talk at times about splitting the Challenge Cup up and having a third competition. In fact, there used to be a third level tier which had Team Russia in it, domestic level Italian rugby in it, and stuff like that. That doesn't exist anymore. I personally would be against a third tier cup because if people don't care about the second tier cup, like imagine Newcastle and Dragons and Perpignan all playing each other perpetually in this third tier cup competition that none of them want to be in. Not for me, thanks.
all right. So now the other thing that bothers us all is the fact that you play a couple of games in December, and then you play a couple in April, and then you play a couple in May, and it's all, like this weekend's the semi-finals, but the finals only in 3 weeks' time. I mean, that makes it even worse to keep interest in it, and it's difficult to understand. Why don't we play, or why is the European Cup not played either before or after the Six Nations in a block, or a bigger, a bit of a bigger block, not this, spread out kind of a thing? Or is there any other way that they maybe can accommodate it?
Well, yeah, this is a big complaint and quite a lot of what everybody wants to change. Now it now starts in December, which is late. It used to start before the autumn internationals. It used to be you'd have 2 rounds of European Cup ahead of the November tests. So now it's after that. And yeah, people don't like it. And I think everyone's agreed that it doesn't work. The Northern Hemisphere calendar is a mess. And this is something that's one of my pet things in rugby union is if you look at the Southern Hemisphere calendar, it's perfect. The All Blacks they play 14 Super Rugby games and then they play 14 internationals, and the All Blacks can stage a game every week if they want from July to December, and make as much money as they want, and it's fine, and it's a digestible product for the fans and everything. How the Northern Hemisphere allowed itself to get into this state, I don't know. I don't know what the first domino that fell was, but to have league rugby and then internationals and then cup and then league and then cup and then Six Nations and then league and then cup and then league and then cup and then league. It's a massive mess, and it absolutely, if anybody's smart, they'll fix it. But like I said, I don't know the first person that allowed this to happen. Like, there used to be an extra thing as well. There used to be an Anglo-Welsh Cup or a British and Irish Cup, which had um, like even more games, and there was midweek fixtures played until surprisingly recently. But yeah, like I said, I don't know who enabled it to happen, but it absolutely needs to change. Unfortunately, I don't think it ever will because no one in rugby actually changes anything.
So if they wanted to reduce the teams, what do you think? What was the format before the South African teams joined? How many teams were in the Champions Cup? And how difficult was it to qualify for that? And was it more prestigious or was it as easy as it is now?
Yeah, it was more prestigious. There was only 6 teams from the URC. I want to say 6 teams from the Premiership and the top 14 as well. There was an odd number at one point where there was a playoff game where between I think the winner of the Champions Cup, whoever that was, that league got an extra spot, and then there was a playoff game between the other two leagues, and there was a playoff game once between the Ospreys and the Scarlets to get into it as well. So it wasn't always perfect, but generally there was fewer teams in it, and like I said, it was to the cup format. So I guess it can't have been 6 times 4, but maybe 5 times 4 or something. There was less teams, and it was harder to get in. But having said that, there was geographical qualification in the URC to make sure that there was at least one Welsh team, at least one Italian team, at least one Irish team, at least one
The
Scottish
Pro
team that
14, you
got
mean?
in. Yeah, well, in the Pro 14 and the Magners League that preceded that and things, you got in based on geographical qualification, which, to be honest, now this is coming from a Welsh fan who obviously we didn't get into the Champions Cup on merit last season. But when the English get 8 out of 10, it's difficult to argue that the Welsh shouldn't get 1 out of 4 automatically. So I'm not totally against geographical qualification, to be honest.
Well, if you look at
But
that,
then an
then
Irish person would have a completely different view because they'd say that's not fair because we're probably going to be better than you and then not get in.
yeah, because they're also only 4 teams. You're right. No, it's interesting because if you take it, let's say that they move it to the top six now. That's going to be 3 South African teams then, one Irish team, from what I'm projecting the thing to end up as a Scottish team and a Welsh team, and that's
Two
not a
Welsh teams.
European. No, top six. I think Cardiff's going to
Oh, it's top
be,
6. Sorry, yeah.
yeah. If we change it to top six now, I mean that's going to be even more lopsided, and people are going to be even more upset about the fact that South Africa is now almost dominating a European competition. Don't you think?
Yeah. Um, Look, I don't know what to tell you, MV. I would get rid of it entirely.
Yeah, me too. I mean, we're not interested. We're not sold in it. I hear what he's saying. People are saying it's prestigious, everything. Yeah, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Anyway, let's talk about the semi-finals. Firstly, the Challenge Cup, the sort of lesser of the two competitions. Edinburgh taking on Bath. I suppose for me, from looking from South Africa, Bath must be the clear favourites.
Clearly, absolutely clearly they are. I think people don't realize just how much Bath are dominating the English Premiership at the moment. The English Premiership is the most dominated league. People go on about Leinster and Toulouse. The gap in the Premiership is bigger than it is in the URC or the top 14, and certainly in Super Rugby. The gap between them and the rest is bigger than the gap between Leinster and Glasgow, is different, bigger than the gap between Toulouse and Bordeaux. They've sewn up top spot on the log with 3 games left to go, and they did it with ease. With another 50-point win. It is the most dominated league, and they are clearly the best. The interesting thing about Bath is they haven't actually won a trophy since the 90s. They're a very historic team and a team that is held in very high regard by maybe people in the media who were around when they were in their pomp in the 90s. But yeah, they haven't actually won that much lately, but they are clearly by a long way the strongest English team, which makes it interesting that they got knocked out in the pool stages of the Champions Cup.
Yeah. Something else I just read up. They've won the Premiership Cup now. What is the Premiership Cup compared to the Premiership itself? What's the difference there?
The Premiership Cup is a development competition. The idea is that you put out your kids. It's a bit like how the Curry Cup was when it was development teams.
Mm.
So it's a cup competition with academy teams that they put out against it, and they also get teams from the Championship to come up and play against them. Although that's not happening from next season. But yeah, it's a development tournament. So Finn Russell won't have played in that. Thomas Dutoy won't have played in that.
Okay, that makes a bit more sense now. It was so confusing, all these cups and leagues, and when they've got the same name, basically. Yeah, it's very confusing. Anyway, so Edinburgh only lost once this season so far. Now, Bath obviously lost, fell out of the Champions Cup, which I still think is not the best thing to do. But last time these two teams met, Edinburgh won quite convincingly, but admittedly it was 2 seasons ago. But Edinburgh wasn't that bad. They beat the Bulls at home, and this is going to be at home for them again. Bath has to travel up there. Is it really as clear cut as it looks to be on paper?
Well, Edinburgh are a very, very difficult team to read on paper because their home and away form is so drastically different. They drew with Zebra away weekend
Mm.
just gone. They lost at home to the Sharks. God, we could talk all day about the Sharks, couldn't we? But the Edinburgh objectively aren't very good, and I think a lot of their fans are very unhappy. And you get the vibe that they're not a team that's particularly happy.
Mm.
But no, I can't be convinced that Bath aren't favourites. It's just Edinburgh is just for every time they have a terrible result, the next week they seem to have a brilliant result. So who knows?
You mentioned that Sean Everett, South African coach at Edinburgh, is not particularly beloved amongst the Scottish supporters. Is that still true? Does it still hold water?
Very much, very much. He is not. I think most Edinburgh fans made up their mind a long time ago that he wasn't the guy. He's not. I, I'm told he's not the most personable guy either. He's not very charismatic in
Mm.
interviews. He doesn't win over your heart when he's speaking, and the team on the pitch certainly doesn't win over your mind either.
Now, talking about South African coaches, the other team, Bath, also has a South African coach, Johan van Graan, also an ex-Bulls assistant coach, ex-Springbok assistant coach. Is he beloved?
Well, he's certainly winning over people's minds, given how much better Bath have got since he turned up. He's certainly beloved by Munster fans because he used to coach at Munster as well. Munster got obviously a rich history of
Mm.
South African coaches, and Munster fans count him as one of their own. And every time the Bath, this is very Munster fans are very like this. Once you've played for Munster, you're Munster forever. That's why Munster fans count the Springbok World Cup win as theirs because Jean Klein played in it. Um,
And Rassie was there, and Jacques was there, and everybody.
Yeah, uh, so every time the Bath win, Munster fans go, ah, yeah, good, Johan van Graan. So they like him a lot. So I assume that Bath fans must like him a lot as well. Look, the team's really, really good. So if they don't like him, they've got to have a good reason.
Well, they lost in the final last year against Northampton Saints. Why are they so good this year? Even better than they were last year. I mean, they ended quite high up last year, but I mean, this year they are, like you just said, streets ahead of everybody else. What has changed? What has started to click? What made the difference?
Money. So the Premiership don't publish their books like the top 14 do. Top 14, the way that they publish their accounts and things is actually really transparent and really engaging. The English don't do that. So the English salary cap is 6.4 nominally, but then you're allowed loopholes, exemptions, and credits up to 7.8 million pounds. And then on top of that, you're allowed a marquee player. And it is a widely held belief that the highest paid marquee player in England is Finn Russell at Bath. So basically, Bath are spending the most money on their squad. And that's why they get a lot of snide remarks off other clubs in the Premiership of, isn't it amazing that they're able to have this incredible squad
Mm,
within the salary cap when nobody else can?
yeah.
So it seems that everything's above board and legitimate, but basically, Bath have got the best squad because they spend the most money on their squad.
Okay, let's talk about the other semi-final. Lyon versus, was it Racing 92? Sounds funny to say it like that. We know those teams. Lyon that played against the Bulls a couple of times. The Sharks lost to them just now. The Sharks in an academy team over there. And then Racing 92, a couple of our players played there. Frans Steyn played there. Johan Goosen played there and a couple of things. What do you expect from that match?
Havica Diamani still plays there. He
Okay.
replaced Sia Khaleesi. I feel like Racing are going to be going for this. So Racing are a bit of a bit of a butt of a joke in France because they are this Parisian team. They've got their history talks all about how they were the aristocrats and things, but they never win anything. They've won one top 14 title since the money came in. They're owned by a guy called Jackie Lorenzetti, who's extremely wealthy, a real estate guy, and they keep buying really famous marquee players like Sia Khaleesi. They've had Jamie Roberts in the past. They had Dan Carter was there. They won the league with Dan Carter playing for them. They've had Joe Rock, like really famous players have played for Racing, and yet they've had one league title. And actually, last season they were pretty terrible. They're not great this season. They had a really, really, really bad first half of the season. Sacked their coach Stuart Lancaster. Apparently, he didn't appreciate the French way, and things went really badly. But they've still got amazing players like Joshua Tuasova plays for them, at number 12. He played at the weekend against Stade Francais in the Paris Derby, and he was unstoppable, like skittling players in front of him. He's probably like the one player in the world who, if he smashes through, you go right off. When he's on it, there's not much you can do about it. So, but they've had a really bad season. But now I think they're going to go full guns blazing for the Challenge Cup because if they can finish the season with a trophy, they can say, "Ha, see, it was worth it," and it will be the first trophy, like I said, that they've won since 2016 in 10 years. So I think that they will go for it. They're up against a Lyon team which is playing reasonably well, scoring tries. Lyon is a very jouet team, a very exciting team. So, like, a stat about them is that they've got the highest scrum completion of any team, not because they want to drive people back in the scrum like the Bulls do. They want to restart play. Their scrum completion is high because the ball's in and it's out, and they play on. They've got them, I think, third most meters made of any team in the top 14 behind Bordeaux and Toulouse. David Niniashvili is back. He's a hell of a player. Baptiste Couillou, who plays for them at number 9, is the most try-scoring scrum half in France. He scores more tries than Dupont. And so it should be an interesting game. It's being played in Lyon, which makes it interesting. On the balance of the season so far, you would say that Lyon should be favourites. But I just feel that Racing are going to want it more and they're going to go for it more. And they've got players in that team like Owen Farrell, like Joshua Tuasova, who are used to winning big games. And I, I can see it happening. I can see them winning this trophy.
Yes, yeah, no, for you, the favorites then are going to be Racing 92. And if they go to the final, Racing 92 versus Bath, I mean, Bath should still be the favorites, I suppose.
It's funny, because that's quite a prestigious game in terms of the brands that are associated. And a lot of people would think that wouldn't in years gone by that wouldn't look out of place as a Champions Cup final. But yeah, in that game, I think that Bath would be favourites. I think Bath are a better team than Racing, but you never know. Bath haven't won a trophy for 20, 30 years for a reason.
Right, let's move on to the Champions Cup. The first semi-final is Leinster versus the Northampton Saints, who were the ones we just talked about. They pitched up at Loftus and surprised the Bulls when the crowd wasn't watching. The audience wasn't aware of what's going on there. And I spoke to Jared Wright today of Planet Rugby, and we were sort of wondering whether Leinster's going to have a bit of a fumble again. Maybe one of the two trophies that they're competing in, but fumbling it again when it comes to the other. We're not sure which one is which, but what do you think the chances of that are, or do you think they're just going to steamroller over everyone?
Last season, Northampton went away to Leinster in Croke Park and gave them a bit of a scare. Leinster went up 3-0 early on and then kind of took their foot off the gas, and Northampton got back into it. Northampton make up the bulk of the England team. In fact, it's looking likely that the entire England backline might be Northampton players, which I think makes sense because that's the one thing that England and Steve Borthwick was getting really wrong in 2024 is every player in the backline was from a different club. And there's a reason why national teams don't do that. There's a reason why France is mostly Toulouse and UBB. There's a reason why South Africa is mostly Sharks or Stormers if you go a bit further back. Or Ireland is mostly Leinster. The cohesion wasn't there. So now they started doing that, and it is looking like that Saints will be the bulk of the England team moving forward. I can't explain what's gone wrong for them in the Premiership. Apparently, they've had injuries. They've been unlucky in a couple of games. But if you look at the log, they're quite a long way down for the defending champions. But the Premiership's a little bit cursed from that point of view. It's looking like there's going to be 5 or 6 different winners in 5 or 6 years in a row. So whoever wins the English Premiership tends to have a really bad season the following season. I can't explain it. On paper they shouldn't touch Leinster. The Leinster squad depth is obviously the best anywhere in the world, and they're at home. I can see Northampton Saints giving them a scare. I can see it being tight. I don't think it will be another 50 or 60 nil, but if you're the smart money is on Leinster for sure.
Yeah, okay, that's quite interesting. They, like you just said, 52-0 against the URC champions, albeit with a severely depleted squad, lots of injuries and the likes, but still, you wouldn't expect that to happen. And I wanted to ask you about that. Do you think Glasgow Warriors, just digressing for a second, maybe took a bit of a psychological blow there and sort of, falling off a cliff a bit towards the end of the URC season?
I think Glasgow are hampered massively by injuries. I think when it came to the Leinster game away, it's kind of started as soon as the full-time whistle went against Leicester. And one of their players was asked by the interviewer after full-time, so you're away to Leinster next. What do you make of that? And he just kind of shrugged his shoulders, just went, "Oh, it is what it is." So I think they talk about being beaten before you walk on the pitch. I think they were beaten before they got on the ferry or on the plane or however they got to Ireland. So yeah, and like I said, I think injuries are just piling up for Glasgow. I really enjoyed their game against the Bulls. I found it absolutely fascinating. But when I saw the teams announced and they had Kyle Steyn at outside centre and there was no Xander Fagerson, I kind of thought that's not a strong Glasgow team. So, you know, it's buts and maybes, but if Glasgow can get some players back fit for the playoffs, because they are probably going to make top four. So once they're there, if they get players back fit, they've already shown that they can get the results.
Oh, we're predicting a Bulls Glasgow semi-final at Loftus, and we're predicting a Leinster Sharks semi-final in Ireland. Agree with that?
Yes, I do agree with that. That makes sense to me. What's been the reaction in Bulls land about Villaroo kicking the ball out and not denying Glasgow the losing bonus?
No. Jake explained it, that he was a bit worried about the fact that Glasgow was running everything and they were actually scoring points, scoring tries at that stage. He was worried about hitting the post or not getting it over and whatever. Bit of a long story, bit conservative, like Harry called it. But what Jake was saying afterwards, if Leinster loses against Glasgow loses against Leinster, then the Bulls will be ahead, or are ahead anyway on the number of games won compared to Glasgow. They've won one more game. So if Glasgow drops that bonus point against Leinster, even if they win, but they win without a bonus point, the Bulls will go ahead. So people are accepting of that. I think the fact that we beat them, overshadowed everything else. I don't think there's not much of an issue being made of not kicking for posts. Not initially, but not after it was explained. I suppose we're just too grateful to actually win that game. That
Fair
was a
enough.
surprise now. Yeah, I'll tell you what. Anyway, we're not talking about them. Let's talk about the other semi-final, which is Bordeaux versus apparently a severely crippled Toulouse team. I mean, they've got injuries up to anything, apparently.
Well, yeah, we've learned today that Pietro Malvaca is out for the season with a suspected ACL injury picked up in training, of all places, which is very un-Toulouse. You don't hear about players getting knocks in training, so that's highly unusual. So that's going to affect them. Obviously, we know there's no Dupont. They looks like for a minute they were going to have a crisis at scrum half. That seems to have eased a bit now. So Paul Grau is their only fit senior scrum half, but it looks like Saito, the Japan player, is back in training. Whether he'll be back available for this game, we're not sure. And Ange Capuozzo is also back in training. So it's thought that he might be on the bench. And he's been covering scrum half as well. The Italian fullback slash winger, I think he's a winger, he's not a fullback, has been covering 9 for Toulouse. Now, Toulouse backline is kind of positionless. You can play anyone, anywhere, because they're all great players and their pack is so dominant, it doesn't matter. But yes, there was a minute when it was looking like there was going to be an injury crisis, but it looks like it may have come good just in time.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because there are apparently people saying that Leinster's road to the cup is sort of paved now. There's no, there should be an easy walk in the park. Sort of a warning sign, if you ask me. What do you think of that statement?
Yeah, they should be favourites. Toulouse without Dupont. If you look at how close the final was last year, and you would say that Leinster are better than they were last year and Toulouse are worse, then yes, that automatically makes Leinster favourites, definitely.
We jumped ahead a bit and assumed that Bordeaux is going to beat Toulouse, I suppose. Is that realistic?
So Bordeaux have already beaten Toulouse twice this season in the league, and they're playing at Matmut Stadium, which is in Bordeaux. It's not Bordeaux's home stadium, but it is in Bordeaux, and it's the football stadium, and it's a very, very fancy stadium. And it sold out the same day. The tickets went on sale, and they all sold out in the same day.
Mm.
So it's a big game. It's a bit of a shame that we get these repeat league fixtures, but it is what it is. But Bordeaux got beat at home by La Rochelle last weekend, and that was a very surprise result. Should be very disappointed with that. Bordeaux have got injuries for themselves. Their pack isn't really befitting of a team at the level that they are. To be honest, their pack is very upgradable. I think there's a lot of players from around the world who would get into Bordeaux's pack. And then they've got a crisis in the centres. Rohan Jans van Rensburg, who's been playing extremely well for them, is injured. Moafana is injured. Uh, Deporter is injured. So they're down to like their fifth and sixth choice centres. And I think Burros is injured, their first choice fullback as well. So I would probably say that Bordeaux's injury situation is worse than Toulouse's at the moment. So I don't think many Bordeaux fans are extremely optimistic for this one. I think obviously, look, fans are always going to back their own team, but you just feel that if Toulouse, with the injury situation that they had, could go down to Toulon and win, then they can probably go away to Bordeaux and win as well.
Right. Lastly, we know the finals are played at a neutral venue, Cardiff, this year. The Friday night is the Challenge Cup final, and the Saturday is the Champions Cup final. Just remind us again, does that make a difference? Why are they doing that? Number one, and secondly, do you not lose the benefit of having a home crowd around you, or people buying the tickets anyway and traveling there? How does that work?
So the Champions Cup and Challenge Cup finals are seen as a marquee event, and the finals are announced a long time before it. And there's an argument for doing that. The top 14 do it as well for the semi-finals. So the top 14 final is always in Stade de France in Paris, and the semi-finals move around. And what that means is that fans can buy tickets for it a long time in advance. This is a big criticism of the URC finals. You don't know where they are until the last minute, is that you can't buy tickets for them until a week in advance, which obviously turned out fine for the Bulls in Pretoria. Managed to get 50,000 at a week's notice, as did the Stormers, which is a phenomenal achievement. But there is an argument to say that if you lock it down in the future for a long time, you get fans who will buy tickets and go to it as tourists almost. Now that maybe does affect the atmosphere because you don't have particularly partisan crowds, but there is an argument for it. And like I said, the Champions Cup finals are seen as a marquee event, and it moves around. And this is actually surprisingly, if you look back on it, the the final is normally either somewhere in England or Cardiff. Those are the two. I think London and Cardiff are the two cities that have hosted it most, and it's going to Lyon season after next. It's actually going to Bilbao in Spain, and it's been in Spain once before as well. So but there isn't much diversity in terms of nation that hosts the Champions Cup final. Dublin's had it a couple of times, but yeah, it's when you consider that Cardiff isn't exactly far away from anywhere in England, it's
Yeah. They were pushing hard for Cape Town to host it, if I'm not mistaken, the year after next, after Bilbao now. But that sort of went away. It looks like they didn't announce Lyon. So I suppose Cape Town said no, thank you. Because I
yeah.
think it's a huge risk to take to rent out that stadium and hope that people will come from overseas and fill it up. But
It's
we've
a
seen,
massive risk. I'm not sure why they would do that, to be
yeah,
honest. It's a massive risk.
yeah, imagine Gloucester and Exeter pitch up for a final in Cape Town. There's going to be two people in the stands, I'm sure. Anyway, which game would you be looking forward to the most this weekend? Which do you think is going to be the game of the weekend?
Good question. I'm a little bit weary of Toulon versus Bordeaux because I've seen it twice already this season, including once in this stadium already. And I just have a bad feeling that Toulouse are just going to have enough, and that's a little bit boring. So I'm probably looking forwards to Lyon Racing the most because I genuinely don't know what's going to happen in that one. And it's two teams that are going to be going for it, um, who are mostly fit squads. So I think that's probably the game of the weekend where there's most likely to be, you can't really call it an upset, but I guess two underdogs. Both teams are underdogs.
Yeah, true. Now I'll be watching that Bath Edinburgh game that with the biggest amount of attention. Well, my South African cap on, because the South African players in the Edinburgh team. Thomas Atoy playing for Bath. Two South African coaches. I mean, that's probably the most South African interest we'll have in a while for any semi-final or other these tournaments going forward, I suppose. Anyway, thanks. You appreciate it. I understand a bit better now.
Cheers, mate.
Rugby with Huw Griffin.